Good afternoon, everyone. Today, for the next hour, Brad Harris and I from Full Spectrum Survival are going to discuss how to thrive in the grand solar minimum, how you can prepare right now for the changes to come, the signs around you that you're seeing, how can you get ready, how can you inform those around you, how can you get community involved. This is what we're going to discuss for the next hour. I hope it's really helpful for you. And also I encourage you to jump over to Brad's channel, Full Spectrum Survival. It's a plethora of information for you, for your personal knowledge, how to get ready for this, and how to just roll with these changes, and when others around you aren't prepared, how you can become the leader in that community because you have the skills. That's why I say jump over to Full Spectrum Survival. You're going to learn a lot from that channel. There's so much valuable knowledge there that we can be using over these next few years as things around us in our lives begin to change with rising food prices and the effects that go with that. Enjoy the hour's talk.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Full Spectrum Survival's, a weekly live report where we discuss the events that are going on in the world around us and what we can do now to prepare for those events in the future. We have a very special guest that's coming in here to join us tonight. He's going to be here in just a second. I think he just came. David, how are you?
Hey, all right. Thank you for waiting. I had a little technical issue there, but
that's okay.
Yeah.
We were just going to get started and see when you popped in, so I'm glad you were able to get on here with us. Now, this is David. Very special guest. We're going to talk about a lot of things that are really important to all of us within the community. David is the operator of the Adapt 2030 channel on YouTube. He also runs the oilseedcrops.org, which is another way that he disseminates information on extreme weather events and how the weather and the cycles of weather are affecting us and affecting all of humanity today. David, how are you doing?
all right, great. Yeah, the oilseed crops, I was a coffee trader and I used to buy Arabica coffee beans down in Myanmar, which is a tropical country, but we were getting a lot of frost damage and the new seed plantings were experiencing a loss rate around 13-14% each year of new plantings. So I thought to myself, why is it getting cold? So I started the oilseed crops for people to compare information, share ideas about different ways to produce either biofuel, but the food first aspect using the byproduct as a biofuel. Right. And then other ways of different plants that could grow in different climatic conditions, and just a platform to share information. And that's what that's all about. And that's really what led me to the Adapt 2030 and talking about all the cold weather events on our planet. There's an agenda to keep pushing this warming. Why are they not talking about all the cold events? You know, in the United States right now, it's 30 to 40 degrees Fahrenheit below normal temperatures.
Right.
That's not being talked about so much except regionally, right where it's happening.
Well, that's something that I've followed Adapt 2030 for some time now, and your ability to coordinate with others and to disseminate information and the research that you have done has always stood above other outlets that I have seen. And we, like you said, are experiencing not a global warming. We're experiencing extreme weather events, and we have always released this information as cyclical events. And I think that that's something that you touch on a lot, where you discuss that this has happened on Earth before, and that this information, this type of a cycle has been experienced, and we're really in for something in the future. Would you agree?
I would. And you know, the whole cyclical nature of existence was understood by the ancients for so long. They never thought in linear terms. The ancient cultures of our world all believed in cyclical time, that a pattern repeats itself, whether it be 11 years like our regular solar cycle, or 22 years when the poles flip back exactly again.
Right.
Different cycles of the Pacific decadal oscillation, when our ocean in the Pacific warms and cools, and the Atlantic Ocean, the Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation, that's on a 60-year cycle. You know, the planetary orbits themselves, how we undulate above and below the ecliptic of our actual galaxy. All these are cycles that could be understood. And if you know the frequency of them, you can for sure forecast into the future because it's already happened once. So these cycles that you were talking about, Maunder minimum, this is a grand solar minimum that occurred 1640s. The Dalton minimum was in the 1820s. We go back, there's the Wolf Minimum. You can go back to the antique Little Ice Age, which is around 540 AD. 79 AD is a good one because there's really no name for that grand solar minimum, but we know with the planetary geometry and the large eruptions at that time, Vesuvius, etc., that there was a grand solar minimum. So we can predict these cycles, and you know what? There's another one starting right now. It's going to intensify till about 2024.
And I think the important thing about being able to see the cycles for what they are, and like you said, predict what's going to happen in the future, is that that gives us time as humans to prepare for that to the best of our ability. Now, I want to jump ahead of the cart just a little bit and look at the long game. We see a plan in place to increasingly govern the people of this world, the citizens of this world, and lead them very well misinformed and scared of the future ahead. Do you see something similar?
I do, and I see it as a control mechanism of what's going to occur during this grand solar minimum. Because if we do study history, and let's just go back to the 1800s during the Dalton minimum, go back to the Maunder minimum, food shortages were of great concern. Back then, there were not so many people in the world, and like yourself, you're very well prepared to take care of yourself. I've watched a lot of your videos as well. You're very informative, and I always try to tell people, watch this. You can really learn a lot on just survival basic things, how to build fires, and But when we go back to it, there were very few people in the world in 1640, but people still starved to death and froze, and crops failed, and just food shortages were absolutely enormous at the time, which depleted people's immune systems, that allowed the plague to come in. And there was only less than 1 billion people on the planet. So can you imagine now there's 8 billion people, and we're about to experience the same thing. So as a government, what would you do? As the global leaders of our countries, would you come out clean and tell everybody by 2024 you're going to have an entirely different existence? Or would you let people keep going in day to day so they wouldn't quit their jobs, pull the money out of the bank, start fighting for things like seeds, tools, machinery, and whatever whatever you might need to build something to harden your home against cold, wood burning stoves? Would you really tell everybody in advance, or would you just kind of let it play out and then, try to mitigate it and control it at the end?
Well, I think a great indicator of that recently is look at Fukushima and look at what the global governments did in their withholding of information as far as what was happening at the time of the disaster and at the time of the collapse of the reactors. So if you just take that small case study and apply it to what the governments of the world would do to an earth-changing event or a series of events, you'll see, just like you said, withhold information, control the downfall, control the struggle, and keep the cogs rolling, because a government's job is to govern the people. And that's something that people lose sight of, that their job is just to govern the people of the world. And now that's not saying that all governments are evil, all are bad. No, but their job is to keep the cogs of the economy and the cogs of their industry and their corporations rolling. So like you said, we will see misinformed, misaligned information and a guilt placed back on the average person, which I think is something that global warming attempted to do. Would you agree?
I would. They tried to convince us that CO2 was the culprit for all this extreme weather that they had predicted. It wasn't even extreme weather they were predicting in the beginning. I was around for the whole global warming since the inception, since day one when we heard that word. It was all about heating, hot, hot, hot.
Right.
Now, I was just reading articles the other day that says global warming's causing the 70-degree Fahrenheit below normal temperatures that are coming on December 14th to the United States. Really, 50 to 70 Fahrenheit below normal temperatures. Huge snowstorms and outbreaks. But global warming's because there's some feedback loop that now global warming causes cooling and snowstorms and blizzards. And I'm thinking, how do they reverse the narrative like this? So they're so desperate to keep it going. And I just don't see why, except as a distraction mechanism to keep you uninformed. And I don't really get the end play as why they don't want everybody prepared to get through this. Like you said, human instinct, if we had enough forewarning, everybody could prepare. We could have an entire planet fully prepared. This is going to engulf the entire northern and southern hemisphere. There is nowhere to run for this. And people, if they're unprepared, they're going to start to migrate. And we already saw what's happening with the migrations of just tens of millions of people into Europe.
Right.
What will happen when 1 billion or 2 billion or 3 billion people migrate? How is that going to disrupt everything?
Well, I think as you talked about endgame, something important to discuss there is the cogs of the world. And that, you know, oftentimes reality will be seen in video form first, in fictional movies or in books or something like that. And the people of the world panic when they know that some level of doom is imminent. And I do think that that is what, at least from the psychological studies that I have read, that's what drives the governments not to disseminate this information, not to give the people the truth. Because like you said, people would take their money out of their vacation funds and they would put it into solar power or into hardening their home or, you know, growing a garden on every front yard. They would do those types of things. And as we discuss food, something that's very important and dear to my heart is the just-in-time delivery service and system of the first world. And it, you know, we rely so hard on food hitting that shelf. And no matter where you are, even if you're homesteading, if you're not completely off the grid, you're relying on something hitting that shelf using that JIT system. So what are your feelings on how extreme weather and how the events of the future can affect the just-in-time delivery system?
Yeah, I want to cover 2 points. The first one, you said solar panels, and I do believe in getting ready and having your own electrical generation system. One of the greatest skills you can know how to do is provide electricity, whether it be repair a broken system or maybe somebody has all the stuff but they don't know how to put it together. How do you recharge batteries? How do you get inverters reconnected? How do you do everything from start to finish through that system? If you can do that, you will be the most welcome person in that community beyond the person who can grow food. They'll be first, but electricity will be second.
Right.
And also with the grand solar minimum, every single repeat of this, there's an enormous amount of cloud cover that comes in. It's like this. It's a step process. The sun's solar wind decreases. So that pressure on our magnetosphere, on our atmosphere, causes changes in the jet stream. And then it also allows more galactic cosmic rays to come into our atmosphere. And it forms an entirely new cloud layer between 15,000 and 18,500 feet. And if you look at all the NASA satellites like Terra Modis, just take a look in the NASA Earth Observatory, you can see the cloud changes from the year 2000 until now. It's going to get much cloudier, so the solar panel output's going to be reduced during this time. So relying completely on solar and putting all your eggs in one basket, in my personal opinion, would be a mistake. You're going to need to diversify your electrical generation capacity because solar panels are actually going to reduce in the watts per square meter output from the sun, and you're going to have a larger cloud cover. It's going to be rainier in a lot of places, and you see all these rain records being broken, a number of cloudy days. You just can't generate if it's cloudy.
Now, I have something interesting to ask you about.
I'll come back to the JIT in just a moment, but that was my comment about the solar panels there.
Okay, I have an interesting question for you. It's a project that I was just working on today. So I have I'm working on a small perpetual magnet.
Yeah, gravitational vortex power, right.
That's right. So now I built a Joule thief. Are you familiar with what a Joule thief is?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so I built a Joule thief to just power some LED lights off of some, you know, a magnetized fan. And I'm getting a couple of blinks, but I think that you're right. And what we need to do here is focus on furthering our understanding of the electricity needs that we have and on building and repairing and getting into it and tinkering with it yourself. Because, you know, Mr. Teslonian's another great channel out there. There is a vast hidden plethora of information that discusses our ability as humans to free ourselves from the requirements of nuclear power or coal-generated power. And we can do that. So like you said, diversify, work with wind power generation, work with solar, but at the root of that, know how to fix it when it breaks. And, you know, a lot of people don't know how to test you know, polarity. They don't know how to work with, you know, simple soldering. How are you going to solder off the grid if you can't plug your soldering iron in? You know, these types of things, what are you going to do? So what are your thoughts on the best ways that a person can diversify? Say they're thinking right now about going off grid for their electrical generation, or at least substantially. How would they diversify their needs there?
Well, if you do, if you're on the internet right now, look up GVP. It's called gravitational vortex power. And what this does, if you have any running water near you at all, you build a circular tank and you basically make the water spin like you would at the end of taking a bath. At that very moment, the water starts to spin as it gets ready to drain there. And we've all seen that. It makes a little water vortex tornado there.
Right.
You replicate that in a tank, in a circular tank that could actually use, you know, something that we would have for drainage. Those kind of round pipes, you just modify them slightly, make the water spin, and then you put a rotor right in there, and that'll generate enough power for you to power literally homes in America. These are not currently legal to do because you can generate so much power that you can off-sell it to your neighbors with the tiniest of units. I encourage you to look up gravitational vortex power as a secondary source if you have any type of running water at all, from small streams to larger rivers. You can divert channels around, and you can provide so much power that you can actually overproduce and then give it off to your neighbors. That's one suggestion. How about you? What do you think? Any ideas?
I agree with that completely. I agree that you need to take advantage of anything that you have around you. So if you have a running stream, take advantage of that. If you live in a high wind area or a projected high wind area as the earth changes, take advantage of that. Use solar while you can and diversify so that you're not reliant on just one thing. Because just like in our community of the aware and those who are looking to prepare and homestead, you don't want to rely on the government. You don't want to rely just on solar either, because if times change or if something happens, you're going to be stuck there with all of your eggs in one basket. So really moving that around and knowing how to change it up or how to salvage and how to kind of think for yourself outside of the box, like you said with GVP, is something that everyone should at least consider.
Yeah, as well. Well, take a look at Nikola Tesla. For those of you who are looking for more obscure ways of using the charge of the earth itself by burying copper rods within the earth itself to get a charge out of that. There's so many ways that we can start to think about it. But look at Nikola Tesla and the few inventions that he had of actually generating power from the earth's electrical grid itself. You know, ley lines, everybody knows though, but it's an offset substitute of that particular, our soils are comprised of metals. They conduct electricity. You just need to set it up so you can actually get the charge from the air down to the ground and get that in between. That's thinking outside the box there if you want to go for a secondary type of source.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's get back to just-in-time delivery service. What are the pitfalls there, and what can we see if the earth really starts to change in a way that affects food shortages or crop growing, which, like you know, from Myanmar is happening already?
It is. Now, the chicken and the egg, which one's going to come first? The breakdown in the just-in-time delivery system or the drive on food prices that are going to send it into absolutely outer space prices?
Right.
I think the economic collapse might come first because they would want to limit the population movement. Once the food prices start to increase at the end of this year, there'll be all these rosy forecasts for yields coming out this year and how many millions of metric tons of either wheat or canola or corn or soybean or whatever it might be. But when we get down into 2018, it's going to be less than they forecast. And when we get into 2019, it's going to be drastically less than they forecast. There's going to be substantial price drives as people try to switch to substitution crops. If wheat gets too expensive, you're going to move over to millet. You're going to move to sorghum. And then those prices are going to drive on that. Everything's reliant on credit. Just-in-time delivery revolves on 30, 60, 90-day lines of credit to get that container into the store, bought, sold, and paid for, because those are, fast-moving consumer goods. Nobody's paying for a full container cash of anything. But in the future, I do believe we're going to move to more of a cash-based pay now, take now delivery system for food. It's going to get that valuable in the future. Shortage, how much food do we have in our supermarkets in the United States on general? What's the average daily number of supply that's in a supermarket? If everybody ran out there in the same day,
you don't even have a 24-day supply. You don't even have a 24-hour supply.
Yeah, not even. It's gone. People are buying the canned beans at that point. Well, that's the good stuff. Anything dry that you can store, that's what you want to buy. You're not going to be wanting to buy bags of potato chips. So that has no nutritional value and wasting your money. You need to get things that will keep you healthy. feed your family, feed you for a long time. You know, a couple pounds of dried, whatever it might be, beans or millet, sorghum, those are really good. Amaranth, all these kind of offshoot grains that you don't hear about too much. That'll keep you going for a long time.
Now, you brought up a main part of the just-in-time delivery system, and that's being able to get the food to begin with. And as the earth continues to change, the farmers and the governments are not prepared to change their growing habits. And in many ways, they can't change their growing habits because they are so stuck in a cycle of fertilizing, of introducing just massive amounts of minerals and chemicals into the food crops just to get them where they need to go. That as soon as the earth starts to change, they're not going to be able to keep up. They're not going to be able to catch up. So we could be looking at food shortages from that alone. What do you think as far as when there's noticeable change and when we start to see this cooling effect over the entire earth, when will we see that roll over into the growing cycle? And not just on a global level, but on a personal level, people who rely on their gardens every year.
You know, the entire Earth's not going to cool all at once. The growing seasons are going to get thrown out of phase, though. We're not going to be able to plant in the certain amount of time that we're normally used to because the winter will last much longer. It'll be rainier. And then it might snow in September like it did. You know, Canada lost an enormous amount of canola this year due to early freezes and abnormal snowstorms in September up there and October. But there's going to be regional cooling, like this 70 Fahrenheit below normal temperatures will come ripping across the United States. And then it might warm, you get an extreme weather event where a warm front will get sandwiched between two cold fronts, and then you'll get 4 seasons in a day. This is what happened in the 1600s that really threw those people off with their growing. The absolute calendar dates when we plant and harvest as we do today, that's going to be thrown out the window. We're going to have to try to gauge it old school way where you had to really just, maybe it'll work this year, maybe it won't. Not every year is going to be a super cold year. There's going to be some sort of normal years within there, but as the planting and growing goes, they're not going to be used to the cyclical, you know, plant in April and then harvest in September, October. It's going to get shortened. There's going to be heavier rain events, earlier snow events, earlier freeze events. And one thing in the 1600s and 1800s, and also back, you know, in 79 AD and the Roman Empire collapse in 535, blight and mold on the crops. You talk about adding a lot of constituents to get everything to grow. They're going to need to be spraying so much herbicide and fungicide on the crops just to keep it healthy, because the blight and the mold that you saw in France and Germany this year was unbelievable. They couldn't even put that on the auction on the international market. Nobody wanted it. All of it went to animal feed. They only had 20% of the entire French crop that could be used for human consumption. The rest of it was relegated to animal feed. And Russia had some problems too. They couldn't even bid into Egypt this year.
And that's a scary thing too. A startling thing that we all need to take notice of is that we have reached a point that to feed the billions of mouths on this planet, we have to control the bugs through insecticides and herbicides, and we have to introduce minerals back into the earth because we have depleted it. And not just through gardening, not just through farming, but also through poor cover crops, through non-sustainable living. We have depleted the earth's ability to provide on a massive scale. So when you say they're going to have to introduce even more minerals, they're going to have to introduce even more insecticides and herbicides, that's something that's very startling. And I want to go back real quick just to talk about what you said, that the growers, the farmers, won't be able to rely on a pattern like they are today. And that is something that, like you mentioned, it might work this year, it might not. It's at that moment in time that we will start to see severe food shortages, because as soon as a large scale group of crops don't take place, don't come in fully, that's when we'll start to see a hiccup. And that hiccup will, you know, it's like a snowball effect. Then we'll start to see it push on down the line. And pretty soon you'll have people acting like they do in Venezuela, where they're knocking over aid trucks as the government tries to bring in massive amounts of food. And they are, pleading with their government to provide the food for them. So when you mention the inconsistencies there, I think we all need to take note of that and know, of course, we need to know that it's not an end-all be-all. It is not a death sentence. You can prepare for it, but you need to know that that possibility is there and do the best to your ability to prepare for it. Would you agree?
I would. And for the average person who just has a garden in their yard, instead of using all these chemical herbicides, look at Dr. Hamaker's work using granite dust to remineralize your soil. I've talked to lots of people who use just simply granite dust with no pesticides, no herbicides, and they're getting, double, triple yields out of there. Their plants are healthier. The insects just repel by themselves. Granite dust. It's so cheap. $20 for a huge bag. You can do your entire garden with it. And, those are kind of things that you might want to buy right now. Store an extra bag. Granite dust, you can store it forever. It's a rock, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, and people need to consider cover crops and what cover crops reintroduce the best, minerals back into the ground. Now, do you have any extensive knowledge on topsoil and how it's been depleted?
Yeah, I do. Over all these years, there should be a rest and replenishing time. The Hawaiians are really good at that. Back in the day, they used to have 4 plots of land, and they would only farm 3, and they'd always let 1 rest idle. That's the way they would rotate it out.
Right.
We don't do that anymore. It's 24/7 chemical, and nothing ever has a chance to replenish. And the winds and the soil and the rains just erode everything away. We are living on depleted soils. That's why our food's so nutritionally deficient right now.
Yeah, oh, you're right there. I that is a main concern within our community, is how little you get back from store-bought food if you're not in control of that. And then there is a certain scam that goes with organic foods too. So kind of understanding and mitigating all of the deficiencies out there and keeping yourself healthy with what you have available to you. Now, speaking of herbicides and pesticides, we just did a report last week on a new element that they're introducing to mosquitoes that is going to stop their liver function, stop their kidney function, and they actually explode after taking an eating. We're seeing similar things introduced into crops, crop pests, where it actually explodes the creature. Now, with a new introduction of herbicides and pesticides, of course, there is the concern of how its long-term effect will be on human beings and those that consume the crops that it's grown on. Do you have any words of wisdom there for what a person could do to realize those dangers and avoid them if possible?
It's going to come down. Those bees will be affected as well. When they were spraying for the Zika virus, everywhere they sprayed down in the South United States, they had massive extinction level events for the bee colonies down there.
Right.
Did a video on that as well, robo bees. So now they're coming out with these little tiny microscopic robots that they're going to try to use to repollinate our crops after all the bees are gone. I don't even know how you could wash that stuff off enough for you to be safe enough for you to consume that. I mean, already what's sprayed on the crops, how much do you need to wash it using salt water and several rinses to get the traditional, herbicides and pesticides off our crops? Now they're introducing something. How much human testing was done on this before it was just run through and now it's safe? That's going to be a difficult one there. And when we, I want to go back really quick. You asked about the crop losses. We're running at about even keel right now. There's a few million tons of excess, but this year, the yields have been chipped away. It's 5% here, 4% there, 3%, 6%. All around globally, almost all countries that produce food have had some loss this year, whether it be 3%, and France just lost an enormous over 20% of its wheat. What about next year when those numbers double? Once we get to that break-even point, it only takes a few percent losses globally to drive up prices exponentially. It doesn't work linearly like that. It loses 2% on a crop and then it raises 2% on price. No, it's more like it loses 2% and gains 20%. So when we're going in the future, these little losses, watch for next year. Prices this year they're going to increase. You'll see food price increases, but next year It's going to be the talk of the town, if you will.
Now, as the Earth continues to experience extreme weather events, what's the likelihood that North America will experience flooding like they do in Asia on the rice crops?
Well, we saw that event in Louisiana earlier this year, and then all-time record snows in Boston, the 2014-15 winter. There's record snows all across the northeastern Canadian maritime area right now as we speak. All these cold records, and as the weather patterns change with La Nina as itself, we're talking about cyclical patterns. You have El Nino when the Pacific Ocean warms, and then you have La Nina when the Pacific Ocean cools. Now, if you look at maps, you can generally tell where it's going to be rainier, and just the regular La Nina pattern sets in motion flooding across the United States in a lot of areas. That's why year-on-year return yields generally on ag crops are down during La Nina times, because it ushers in an enormous amount of flooding and cloud cover, and these kind of events are associated with La Nina.
Now, I want to jump back just a minute here, and we discussed the carbon footprint a little bit. We touched on it a little bit. We discussed the human effect on climate change. And of course, climate change, like you said, is not synonymous with global warming. The climate is changing. There is no deniability over that, in my opinion, at least. Why is there such a blame game for the humans' part in this?
You had to give an excuse. If they knew the cyclical patterns were coming again, let's say we were the world body 30 years ago, and we knew this, we have 30 years to prepare. Now, how everybody's going to see the weather changes? Now, it's just a simple ploy to have an excuse for when you ask the question. They already gave you the answer before you even asked it. Now it's become a religion.
Yeah, right.
Dividing people. I can't even have a conversation with a lot of people about this without being yelled at, shut down, or whatever within 2 minutes of even bringing up the idea that we could be going into a grand solar minimum. And they're like, well, the heating will outdo the cold.
Yeah, right.
Well, not really, because the modern minimum was -3°C. It dropped the entire global temperature 3 degrees Celsius. And they're talking about 1.5 C warming over a whole century. We're talking about a -3 to -2 degrees C drop within the next 7 years. That's not going to outdo the warming. No way.
I think you brought up a great point of that there, and kind of answers the whole thing. And it's seen over and over again by governments around the world, divide. And like you said, you can't bring it up with some people. I mentioned cyclical climate change on the channel, and I'm a shill for one side or the other. And I could be saying one thing, and the one side will say I'm a shill for the other side, and that side will say I'm a shill for the other side. And there really is a great division there. And I think at the root of this, it's just based upon misinformation and a personal misunderstanding. So I especially like what you're doing at Adapt 2030, and that is disseminating the truth and gathering together patterns that people can see and start to understand themselves. What gave you the passion to start doing that?
When I saw these crop losses in Myanmar, I had believed in the global warming CO2 idea all the way until, say, 2013, just 3 years ago or so. And once we started to see these losses from 2012, and then it happened again in 2013, and then we went on another buying trip in 2014, and whoa, we lost more. Top leaf cover damaged from freezing, literally Myanmar, down near the equator, losing coffee production because the top leaves froze.
Yeah,
crazy
from a couple of years back.
And I had to look for some answers, and I was trying to do a forecast out for 5 years, like what our supply capacity would be. And I just had to really look into this, and I stumbled across John Casey's work. And once I saw John Casey's explanation of the cyclical patterns of cooling, I really looked into these grand solar minimums, and it only took me a very short amount of time to understand, oh yeah, these things repeat, and this is a great explanation of why everything's starting to be in flux right now. But they need to give you an excuse, because you are certainly going to see the changes firsthand.
Well, I think that we've discussed the government's need to withhold information, and they withhold that information based on their need to govern the people and to keep chaos to a minimum and to keep division as far as people not quitting their jobs, keep those cogs rolling. There is some compelling information out there about secrets withheld in other civilizations, secrets withheld in the Vatican right now. Do you have any information on that?
Well, I won't go super deep into it, but you must think these societies that were worshiping the sun and worshiping the universe and looking at star entities, and the priests would look at the sky for thousands of years in meticulous records, and they knew when the eclipses were coming. We couldn't even do that really until the late 1800s with our own mathematics and, you know, forecasting out. How did they have all that information to be able to forecast and create calendars?
Right.
They have an enormous body of knowledge. And when 500 years ago, when the explorations and our conquistadors and the Europeans went out with their navies and went to all these new lands, there was a huge repository of information. I really do not firmly believe that they burned all that stuff that they claimed they have. I really believe it was boxed up and carted back, looked at, surveyed, because I sure wouldn't break tablets that were so intricate that I'd never seen anything like that. You can imagine Europeans rocking over into somewhere in the Central American kingdoms and seeing their artwork and all the steles and this amazing, oh my, would you burn that? You would bring it back to study it. I really believe that's what they did. They have this full knowledge of what the cycles are, far above what we do right now. I mean, they probably have records going back 30, 50, 100,000 years or more based on the cyclical patterns of what the ancients had carved in stone. You can't tell me they burned every single papyrus or whatever they were using on plant fiber-based papers at that time. Just impossible. They boxed it up and took it back.
Well, there's actually some written proof of that, some documented proof that that was part of their religious governance at the time, was to box up and hide any information that could, be. Information has always been key, but information that was useful to other religions or other areas. So there's documented proof that that did happen. And I think you're right that that information just never came back out into the open. It's always been about the control of information, because those who know are able to make decisions for themselves. And look at what we're seeing right now with the fake news meme and how mainstream media and the pro-government narrative is jumping all over, labeling anything that goes against their narrative as fake news. And it won't be long before independent climate research falls into that fake news genre. So what can we do as citizens of this earth to gather as much information as we can now and start to see those patterns? You know, I firmly agree, go to Adapt 2030 here on YouTube and subscribe and start watching. But what else can we do? Are there large groupings of information? Are there places that like minds can get together?
Yeah, the first step is you need to take your own personal power back and quit giving it away to these people who are trying to control your mind through this news feed of real news. Understand that that's all out there for an agenda. I'm a journalism major. I'm not a scientist. I majored in journalism and advertising. I am a research journalist. I put things together and I try to synthesize data across a wide range of disciplines. I'm not an expert in any, but I see the pattern. I put it together in a format and give you news out of my own way that I'd like to present the news. And I see it so you can understand it. Take back your personal power. You do not have to be beholden to these people and do what they say. You're allowed to make your own decisions as a sentient being. You're allowed to make your own decisions on what you believe is correct or incorrect. And I encourage you, look at both sides of the argument and make your own choice. Feel your own feelings. Look at the information and make your own choice. Don't be a toddler where they have to tell you what to think. Demand that you get both sides of the information so you can make your own informed choice with your own mind, with your own, shall we say, power inside that to declare for yourself what is right and what is incorrect. And at that point, by taking that personal power back, that's the first step you need to take. And going to, okay, so I'm going to run down a couple sites here that I use a lot to find my personal news feed.
Yeah.
Tropical Tidbits. This is that news state. It's not a news state, but it's a platform that has an enormous amount of maps. Go into the sea surface temperature maps, the temperature anomalies. It has by region, by globe, southern hemisphere, northern hemisphere. That's a great one for the maps, Tropical Tidbits. And then if you start rolling through like SOT.net, they have a full rundown on all the global weather changes, as well as like Ice Age Now. That's Robert Felix's site. He's got a huge rundown. Every day he's adding 6, 8, 10 different anomalous events. Adorelli, the Watchers, they have a pretty good range inside there as well. I get a lot of people sending me stuff. John Casey, he's an expert. He used to be a NASA advisor. Follow what he's doing too. He's always putting out videos. He just released a new book. There is a plethora of information out there. Now, one wild card in the whole thing here, the magnetic North Pole is really starting to clip along now. It moved 80 miles this year. Magneticreversal.org tracks the changes of where the poles are going, not the physical pole, but the magnetic pole. And you can see why there's so many anomalous birds going to different areas and whale strandings and just an enormous amount of sea life dying off. They're going to the wrong place to breed or to feed, because think about that. If it's clipping at 80 miles this year, it was 40 miles last year, and it had been going along like this, it's moved almost 350 miles since the year 2000, and now it's really starting to speed up.
Now, what are we gonna see as far as indications on the on the Earth level of what's happening with that? What kind of changes will we see with that?
This weather that goes right along into that, because the magnetics is how actually clouds can form themselves, and behavior of human beings. Another wild card, you talked about human behavior earlier. In the 1600s, when the galactic cosmic rays came in, they found a lot of strange, unusual behavior occurring at that time. What we would call, and now is like psychosis, but at the uber level, and it just started when the cosmic rays increased. Now imagine that, where our bodies are a lot of iron and water, and we have chemical. What if our magnetic poles start to shift within our own bodies and our cellular structure based on what's happening on the Earth? So not only would we get the cosmic ray bombardment, the radiation from space that would affect us, but then we have the magnetics on the Earth. So what if you're getting both at the same time? One of the things you would look for is irrational human behavior, or people who flip one day and then the next day they flip back to another person. Like this human behavior that you're going to see the gargantuan changes in the way humans actually behave. One of the signs would be sleeplessness. If you get all these people that can't sleep, that's one of the reasons for the magnetics. You might want to try to find where your North Pole is and line your body when you sleep. It'll help you sleep.
I'll tell you what, you're not wrong there. I had a great friend growing up. She lived across the street, and she was the mother of one of my childhood friends, and she was a trauma nurse for something like 30 years. And every major cycle, and even with the lunar cycles, she would see patterns in the number of people who came in with psychologically driven impurities. And so I think you're right there, that we can start to understand that the future might have some changes in it for how humans behave, and we should prepare for that too on a personal level.
Yeah, and speaking of medications and things that we need to do on a personal level, you need to know basic medical care. And Patriot Nurse has all this stuff that you can think about to go out there. Basic medical care, and also these just-in-time delivery things also bring medicines to our stores.
Right.
These things that people with these antidepressants that they're on, if they instantly go off those, that's going to create psychosis for many, many people. What if you can't get your blood pressure medicine? What if you can't get your cholesterol medicine? These are all just-in-time delivery-based things from the pharmaceutical companies running on the same JIT. So what if you can't get that? What if there's a medicine shortage? What's that going to do for the populace?
Even scarier, what if people can't get their pain pills or their serotonin uptake inhibitors?
Yeah, the SRIs. No, whoa.
Yeah, that's the scary part. I think a person. There are some not easily, but there are some manageable care options for blood pressure. But a person who's on SSRIs or a person who's addicted to pain medication, they're going to make some waves when they can't get a hold of it. Now, somebody brought up a question in the chat room, and it's back to climate change and global warming. And they said that can't cyclical events and man-made warming happen at the same time?
Yeah, I do believe CO2 has about maybe a 5% effect on everything that's happening now. The other 95% is absolutely from the sun. Yeah, I agree. We put a lot of pollutants up you ever been to China? Look how much that weather is affected over there just based on the particulate matter coming out of the stacks that affects, in the morning when the cars aren't running through the cities, it's nice and blue. And as soon as rush hour starts, boom, it's totally gray skies. So there's regional effects. And, we do have some effect on regional weather. I'll agree. We're not at 0% of no effect. We have some effect. CO2.
Right.
Hey, you look back in the past, it's been as high as 7,000 parts per million, and our temperatures have been pretty much the same, maybe a degree or two warmer only at 7,000 parts per million. You can't tell me that raising it by 10 parts per million is going to raise the temperatures up. And just look through the geologic record. And this is where there's a disconnect. The climate science is not looking at geology, and the geology is not looking at paleontology. And there's a whole disconnect between all these different sciences. If they were to overlap, if you look at the geologic record, you see that the CO2 concentrations are way above what they were today and just a couple of degrees warmer. And also, if you look at the temperature records, use the GISP ice core data. That's like the gold standard. They drilled right at the top, the cap there, and went down 2 miles into the ice.
Right.
Look at how the temperature had changed, undulating naturally up and down, up and down, up and down. And when there was a drop in temperature, do a little research. When it dropped on a certain time, like let's say 1040, look around globally and see which societies collapsed. Look around 535 and see the Wei dynasty, the Japanese emperor, and the Roman Empire all ended at that same temperature drop. Look how it affected everybody's food production globally on the temperature drops. I encourage you to do your own research. Here it is, GISP ice core data. Put that in Google, go to the images, and you'll get a bunch of boxes with a bunch of lines going up and down. That's the temperature up naturally, 3 degrees Celsius, down 2, up 1, down 3, up 2, down 3. Naturally, no CO2 involved. We are absolutely in a band of average global rise in temperatures over the long. These people are talking satellite measurements of back to 1979, and they're trying to extrapolate out and say we changed. No, look back 100,000 years. Look back 10,000 years. Look at the Younger Dryas. that was a temperature spike.
I tell you what, that's a great retort. Is that there is some effect, but it is so limited for what we're seeing that it's not worth discussing. We have to take our responsibility as humans and what we've added. And like you said, China. You look at India. People literally fall ill and go to the hospital every day because of the pollutants in the air. However, on an earth-wide scale, it's minimal compared to what we're seeing. Could I add one last little thought there for research for people out there? Sure, yeah.
You're going to want to look up a PhD. He lost his funding because of his alternative opinion about CO2. His name is Murray Salby, S-A-L-B-Y. He did an entire range and study on the amount of CO2 compared to baseline. They couldn't even find the CO2 effect in the background noise. That's why he lost his funding. Yeah, Murray Salby, you should watch a few of his videos. I know maybe you're not so sciencey tech, whatever, but try to get through it and watch and just like skip and go forward and just look at the charts.
Okay.
They couldn't even discern it from the background noise. That's how little effect the CO2 had. He lost his funding. You need to look that up for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, someone brought up something in the chat room a couple of times that's very dear to my heart, and that's geoengineering. And that's one of those conspiracy theories turned fact. And we can look at news articles from around the United States, from Canada, and from Asia, where they are actively engineering the world around us. What do you have anything to say on that? What that's going to do as far as affecting the cycles of the Earth?
There's a couple layers to that onion. The public layer that we see of those stratospheric aerosol geoengineering kind of contrails that come out and disperse and create a white haze. A lot of people think that's to actually change the weather, but I'm going to take you a layer deeper under the onion there.
Okay.
I talked about the galactic cosmic radiation coming in, the galactic cosmic rays that always increase exponentially. They're up 12.5% just over the last 3 years. These are measurable. They have an energetic charge to them. Now the different nano metals that they're putting up there, the strontium, the barium, and the aluminum, when these cosmic rays, Instead of nucleating and creating a cloud particle, when these cosmic rays touch one of those nanoparticulates of metal, they lose their charge and they're not able to create the cloud that it would have created without that particulate metal up there. Cosmic radiation management is another ploy for that. Now, for me, again, think about it. If you're going to put a disinformation program out there, which one are you going to do? Oh, something maybe we can stop the Air Force from spraying up there? Or,
right.
Well, they need to spray this because there's going to be too many cosmic rays. We're going to have biblical floods coming through if they don't put that metal up there to stop these charged particles from coming in and forming an entire cloud layer over the 18,000-foot layer across the planet like they had during every grand solar minimum. So it's a mitigation strategy. It's called cosmic radiation management. If you hadn't heard about that, it's the next layer under the onion. And I truly believe that might be the purpose of the program. And what they feed you with the disinformation going on about, what's happening, like they're trying to bend weather and use HARP and modify this and push weather systems. That's possible too on a small scale. But I really believe it's to try to negate all these particles coming in right now. My own personal opinion. You can agree or disagree. That's just what I feel, though.
Absolutely. I agree that you're never going to get the whole truth, and that there is a multifaceted approach to what they're doing. And I'm not so much talking HARP. I'm not so much talking, contrails, chemtrails. I'm talking about the publicly disseminated information of cloud seeding, silver iodide, things like that. And like you said, that can have a real effect on the rays that are coming in, from outside of our planet. So that's a very interesting take on it, and how the things that we're doing are overtly affecting what is going on from a universal level.
The patents are out there. Anybody who wants to do even one iota of research can find patent after patent after patent for aerial dispersal of these nanoparticulates. And when that comes down into our soils, an overabundance of aluminum in the soil is not going to be very good the way you can grow your crops.
Right.
So, why are all these aluminum-resistant strains coming out for patents for different seed varieties right now? Interesting, huh?
Do you have any intimate knowledge of the global seed bank?
Noah's Ark. They saw it come before, and they lost an enormous amount of plant varieties back in the 1600s. I think there's just a Noah's Ark. The ABDRC down in Taiwan has the second largest seed bank in the world. And then the one in Svalbard they're putting in there. Why would they put it all the way up there, completely out of reach? They're trying to prevent, that is a Noah's Ark to try to continue our survival. Whoever's left at the end of this thing, when we come back, we're going to live in a new style of life. We're going to have a new life. This is a reset button for humanity. It has been every single time.
Right.
You're just going to have to incorporate it into your style of life. Like what you do, that's going to be normal everyday living. And what you're presenting on your channel and your videos on techniques for survival, that's going to be normal. You're going to have to incorporate. It's not going to be a one-off event. That is going to be your new lifestyle. If you can adapt to that, you're going to have an incredibly wonderful, fruitful, prosperous time during this era of change.
I'll tell you what, that kind of falls in line with the common understanding, or at least the growing understanding, that right now we are in a stage of the collapse. We're in a stage of the economic collapse. We're in a stage of the global warfare collapse, and we're in a stage of the earth changes collapse. And they all sort of fit in to each other. What's your thoughts on the fact that as the economies of the world, as the global governments can't hold the duct tape together around the economies any longer, what are your thoughts on the well-written and well-understood pattern that as a country loses its economy, it has no other choice but to go to war? Do you think that we're going to see that in the future?
I know for firsthand fact, I've been told that the number one fear of all the ruling bodies on the planet right now is unchecked population migration during this time. So going back into the economic collapse, it's not going to be because we overspent or we're printing too much money or there's a trade deficit here or there. It's going to be a purposeful demolition so you don't have the means to move around this planet. Because during this prosperity period that we experienced, if you're 50 years old or younger, you didn't experience any hardship in your life of economic collapses, really. You had a few stock market collapses in the 80s and 90s and 2008. But really, something on the level of the Great Depression, which my grandparents experienced, We've had nothing like this. We've been able to accumulate our entire lives. So if you look at bank balances and IRAs and just an enormous amount of wealth that people have stored in their real estate, people have means to move around right now like they have never had before. Air transportation is so easy, and we all got capital. Everybody's going to want to move somewhere when it gets colder and food prices, maybe it's cheaper in another country where they produce something. That's not going to happen. You're going to have literally billions of people moving around, and when they bring all their wealth into a poor country, what's going to happen when, let's say, as an example, somebody from Northern Europe has an enormous amount of cash, or somebody from America has millions in their bank account, or hundreds of thousands, and then they move down to an impoverished nation with their big money, and then they start buying up land and try to compete with the locals for resources. That's just a recipe for disaster right there. And that's one or two people. We really need to start thinking in the billions on everything when this goes down. They're going to limit population migration by ushering in a purposeful collapse. And this one is going to be a complete wipeout of your ability to move across this planet. I'm just going to leave it at that.
Now, how important would you say a person's personal level of preparedness and ability to be mobile is as the Earth continues to change? I agree that everyone should homestead when they're able to. You should grow as much as you can, learn as much as you can. Skills are so important. But when it comes down to it, if a major event is happening in your area, you need to be able to move. What are your thoughts on the future of the Earth and how people will need to migrate just for survivability?
Now, you also can adapt during this time. You just don't need to get up and leave and pack up. Imagine turning the south-facing wall of your home with abandoned glass around when, malls close or whatever. The persons who can install this and turning your own home, part of your own home, into your own indoor garden. How about taking containers and turning those into indoor grow spaces that can grow in the middle of winter? You're going to need to bug out. If you do, it's going to be a short time, and then you can return back, because almost all the scenarios that are played out, everything that goes wrong within the first 2 to 3 months, and then everything kind of settles down at that point. People who lose their meds, they're going to freak in the first 2 weeks, they're out.
Right.
Social chaos, when you go charging in a band, when it comes down to it, this little light-handed stuff that we get of police with tear gas and rubber bullets, they're going to go to live rounds and tanks. That's going to take out the next set of thugs, if you will. When it comes down, it's going to go fast, and it's going to be a short 3 to 6 week event. And if you can bug out that long enough to come back to your own place, if you're not a threat to the stability of the system at that point, you're going to be able to come back to where you were and get started again. Yeah, you're going to need to get out of there for a little while. Maybe you won't be in an area. Right. It's going to be the major areas that are going to have the most difficulty are large cities. If you're out in a countryside area, nobody's going to come out there and mess with you. And if you are, you can band together as a community and get together that way. And that's why I keep coming back to my channel. We are going to need to work together as communities. Nobody's going to do this on their own. You can't grow enough food by yourself. You're going to need to work in a community setting like they did. Homesteading, rural homesteading. It could be just growing indoor gardens on an abandoned building. But whatever it is, you're going to need to work together as a community to get through this. There's no solo surviving. This is a lifestyle change. Can you think you can imagine living by yourself today, growing your own food? It's very difficult. Right. We even have other stuff to supplement it. We have good weather. So imagine when the weather turns bad and you're trying to survive on your own. You're going to need a group of people. Right.
Or if social times are tough and you have to stay up all night because nighttime is a time of danger. So you're absolutely right. You need community. And that's something that we strive to give that information and hope that people really reach out outside of YouTube and discuss those things with each other. And, that's one of the most important aspects of your outreach at Adapt 2030 is togetherness, and that there is no solo survival. And you give this information freely and to people who need to know what's happening and how that can affect their life. And I've never seen you in your dissemination of information give a stance that was, what's going on and you're not going to accept any other theories. I've always seen you as open to information. If someone has good research, you'll read it and adapt to it, or adapt it into yours. So that's something that I've always applauded with your work. And I have a quick question, and that's, I've read some white papers on universal effects that is outside of our Earth their effects on viral mutations and bacterial mutations here on our Earth. Do you have any information on how the future of the universe might affect pandemics or viruses here on Earth?
I don't know. I'm just looking from the past. And again, I'm always continually learning. I try to read as many articles as I can. You know, as I'm going through, I try to read the entire article, although I skim read through it, but I'm always continually looking for new research. Even though I don't publish it on the videos that I do, I'm always scouring, especially through history. Because when we look at these repeating cycles, there are pandemics with every single grand solar minimum. Right. And it could be ushered in from, you know, the cosmic ray increases, the radiation in our bodies, whatever it is. There's always a pandemic that occurs with these things. That's just a natural, maybe it's a natural check and balance of our Earth system, where even, you know, grander, larger mammals are affected as well. You know, they find these quantum jumps in the records of fossil history where there's instant mutations across wide range of species, including plants, animals. You know, it just seems to happen in a very short period of time. That is all external galactic cosmic ray increases and other external forces off our planet playing with, say, our chemical structure, our mitochondrial structure here on this planet. I do agree something's going to get strange. Expect a viral pandemic that's going to be uncontrollable with modern medicines as we go into this thing. Maybe not this year, but look around 2023, 24 when it gets really cold and we have no protection from our magnetosphere right around that time.
Yeah, without a doubt, we are long overdue on the Earth, and we've controlled pandemics and viruses as a whole for a long time. And we're seeing just a natural mutation, a natural change within the Earth of bacteria adapting to what we have fought it off with and working, you know, finding kinks in the armor and kind of working its way through it. Now, for anyone that's watching this in the future, we kind of jumped the gun and we got into the thick of it real quick. Can you just give me a quick synopsis of what the solar minimum is?
Well, the grand solar minimum, we have to function on the electric universe model, not from internally combusted star. When we talk about the electric universe, what we consider, or what you see as that dark space in between stars, is actually 99% plasma. Our entire universe is filled with plasma.
Right.
We operate on an electrical universe principle here. Everything's charged across the stellar medium itself. So like an electrical current, when you turn on your light or turn it off, there's an excess amount of charge coming in. Our sun operates on the same way. There's no way to explain the variance in the output of the sun if it's an internally combusting star that's supposed to combust at a certain rate indefinitely for billions of years. That's always static, measurable, and never fluctuates. That's impossible. Our star goes through increased activity with this grand solar maximum that we saw with this maximum heating. They said that through the research that I've read over the 1990s and the early 2000s was some of the most active our sun has been in thousands of years.
Yes, right.
Now we're going to roll right back into, it's going to get, after you had that, you know, it's like a capacitor, boom, the electrical charge is gone. Now we're going back down into, it's going to decrease in its activity state. There's no other way to explain the ebbs and flows of the output of our sun except through the electrical model of our universe, the electric universe. Now that solar wind stops, and this is where it gets interesting. Our magnetosphere and then our actual atmosphere has changes in it. The strong solar wind compresses everything down and we have less earthquakes. Our weather patterns are real stable. Everything's locked into the latitude. There's really very few polar vortices that come down. Well, that's the new name for it. Undulations in the jet stream. They don't want to tell you it's brought on by a weakening solar magnetic field. That would scare everybody. CO2, you're in control. We can change it. Who am I going to pay to make sure that that jet stream doesn't undulate next year? I don't care how much tax. But that's going to affect a lot of different things. You know, look for an increase in earthquakes, an increase in volcanism. That's John Casey's study over there. He's a master on that. He always pinpoints through history when we have grand solar minimums, an uptick in quakes and an uptick in volcanic activity. These extreme weather events you have seen, this is the cusp of the changes. What we have seen up to now is nothing, absolutely nothing. These changes are going to get so heavy and so intense that you're going to understand why legends were created and why ancients carved stuff in stone to pass down the information so we would remember it. It's in our religions. It's ingrained in cultures. It's ingrained in legend. They put it there for a reason, because these changes that we see are so, when 2023 and 2024, the size of the tornadoes and the vortices in our atmosphere, you might see 5-mile wide tornadoes coming through at that point. These water spouts, they've been measuring water spouts for 400 years. They've never seen them this wide before. These are literally EF1 tornadoes coming off of the ocean that are water spouts.
Right.
The mixing of the cloud patterns, you get these extreme atmospheric compression events that are dropping 3 feet of rain in a single storm. That was Louisiana, for example, and also, what just happened in Italy and then France earlier in the year. These weather events are going to intensify from now. We're just at the beginning of the grand solar minimum. It's going to run until 2035, so the midpoint will be 2024. It's going to intensify each year until then. And that's what it all is about. It's a cyclical pattern. It's a weather change on our planet, as well as, I'm going to bring up one last point. All the planets in our solar system are changing. If you do the research, every single one of our planets is experiencing weather change phenomenon, electrical changes, and global warming and climate change on every single planet. Start with Neptune. Look at Jupiter. Look at Mars. They're all experiencing weather changes and actual climate changes on their systems. There is no CO2 up there. There's no humans driving that.
Right.
It's an electrical force from our sun going out in our solar system. And our solar system is passing through, an energetic cloud as well. So there's cosmic forces that are driving the systems terrestrially here. There's no way to mitigate that. Sorry, no tax will take care of that. And it is an outside force. You're right.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you brought up meteors. What is your thoughts on the valid concern that we could see large meteor events here on Earth?
The amount of dust that's been up in the atmosphere just over the last 3 or 4 years, again, when we come back to the solar wind pressure on our Earth's terrestrial atmosphere and our magnetosphere, as that weakens, that's a generally hardened thing that bounces them off, or at least it burns them up faster. We're going to see a lot more meteors penetrating the atmosphere much further down than could have been with a strong magnetosphere across our planet here. You've seen the number of meteors has increased exponentially across the news. Yes. Normally those would either be bounced off or they would burn up so far above that you wouldn't be able to see them, but they're getting really low, even making ground now. An enormous amount are hitting the ground with airburst explosions with vibration and shock wave. Now, the Teleblinsk was the first one in Russia, but since that time, there's been dozens of other ones from South America to Asia, Japan, but they're not widely reported in the news. It's a regional reporting of this. Teleblinsk was just so vast, so gargantuan, so huge that it made world news attention. But the ones that occur at night that are captured by a camera and then, the shock wave, that's not so grandiose for news coverage because everybody had a camera in their car and they saw the huge streak coming across. But there has been a lot of airburst explosions over the last year and a half. And these will also increase the amount of meteors and the dust that's in the atmosphere. Noctilucent clouds are early this year by 3 weeks. They were early last year by 2 weeks. So wait a second. Last year, they were early by 2 weeks. This year, they're early by 3 weeks. And they're intensifying from all the meteoric dust in the atmosphere. What's going to happen next year?
That's right. What will we see then? Now, David, what's your thoughts?
I always try to go out, what is next year? I don't have the answer. I can forecast out, but if somebody has more information than me, please feed me. I'm willing to listen to new ideas, new concepts, new theories. As always, I'm willing to learn and change with the information that I'm fed.
That's right. Now, what are your thoughts on the fact that we could experience here on Earth? We're so reliant on our electronics, and not just on an individual level. Sure, all the teenagers of the world would go crazy if they didn't have their iPhone, but the governments of the world are so reliant on electronics for our nuclear power plants, for our everyday life. What are your thoughts on our ability to withstand and endure a large EMP? And is a large EMP possible at our solar minimum?
It is. They find a lot of these giant events of coming off the sun. I wouldn't say CMEs, but it could be filament releases or CMEs, both. they find some of the highest levels coming off during these grand solar minimums. And it's kind of in an inverse way to think. It doesn't really make sense. If the sun's going to be into a decreased state of activity, how could there be such a large solar flare coming off?
Right.
It's like a capacitor discharge that lasts, and it sends out a lot of particles. I don't know why we're not hardening the grid in the United States against the EMP. It would only cost a few $1 billion. We spend more on the wars over there running around the Middle East than we are hardening our own electrical grid against such an EMP pulse. Carrington event's a perfect example.
Right.
They had one in the 1600s during the modern minimum too, but there was no cabling back then.
Yeah, right.
But it still caught houses on fire, caught forests on fire. They had such an energetic event on the planet that, there were vast fires. Chicago fire was also attributed to this solar outburst as well. So we can see it again, but we would have they need to harden everything up. Your computers will be fried. There'll be no more communication if one of these things hits that side of the planet. We will be back into the Stone Age unless you have a Faraday cage ready. Now that might be an interesting thing as a prepping point. Who has a Faraday cage out there? And have you tested it?
That's right. Yeah, that's something that we advocate people looking into. Or, we have some electronics, some shortwave radios in a Faraday cage ourselves, but at a large scale, you're going to be caught unaware. Your car isn't sitting in a Faraday cage garage.
Nope.
So you're going to be caught unaware if a large event like that takes place. But David, with Adapt 2030, one of the biggest parts of your outreach that I respect is that you, like here at Full Spectrum, we don't push fear. Doom, it is not all is lost. There is time to prepare, and that is something that you have always advocated, and that's massive amounts of information without the world's going to end narrative, and letting people know that they have control here and that they can prepare. Why do you think that is so important, to not push all is lost fear, while still understanding that as humans we need to prepare for ourselves?
Well, that would be fake news. Why are we still here? People have always survived during these times. And if you just read history and you can see how they survived and what problems they had back then, we could probably extrapolate out and say, well, we're going to experience the same set of circumstances and problems and difficulties right now. Well, let's look back. Okay, they had a difficulty growing food. Great. Well, let's look how we're going to grow food now. And okay, the current system of how it's grown, produced, shipped, and delivered. Well, let's just think about if that breaks down, what can we do ourselves? Okay, we're going to need to change something. It's like that. If you have a leak in your ceiling and it's raining, you're not going to sit there and go, well, I'm just going to let my house fill up and I'm going to drown. No, you're going to figure out a way to plug that thing up and deal with it. People have always survived through these times. If it really had that much of an effect on a complete population wipeout, we wouldn't have this conversation. Modern minimum, only 25% of the world's population died. That's it. 75% of the people lived. But they had to adapt the way they live. Absolutely they did.
Yeah, right.
And the Dalton minimum, this is in the 1800s. Now, when we come through history, 1800s, we're thinking we're getting pretty modern by the 1820s. We got steam engines and we're moving along and everything. They still lost 10% of the global population at that point. 90% of the people lived, but they adapted their strategy on how to survive. Now, one thing about the bug out as well, if you're going to need to leave the area you're in, are you going to want to walk out there by yourself into a hostile world, or are you going to want to cooperate with people and go as a group? Because you're going to need to be staying up all night. You're going to have people on watch while you're going around. I would rather have a group of 20 people that I really, really trust with my life, moving at the same time, than I would, and then we could grow, we could forage, we can find, we can have different chores, different tasks, so we all can survive. Hey, you start the fire. Hey, you go get water. You need to go out and look for some food. Oh, there's a supermarket. Great, there's a few cans left. Let's go rummage through something.
That's right.
Whatever it is, it's not going to get down to that kind of Mel Gibson kind of apocalyptic, level. But if it does, and there is a serious economic collapse, like I forecast there will be, people are going to be moving around for a little bit. You're going to need to move around in a group, and I cannot tell you enough how much I really believe the connection of the human spirit is going to come back together. Like, this news has divided us for 50, 60 years.
Right.
That's the narrative. Divide you, conquer you, I can control you. Now I think when the news disappears and all that stuff, we're going to come back together. Really, I do believe. They turned us into ice cubes. Like a piece of water, you can freeze into an individual ice cube in a tray. And I think that's what they've done over all these years. They've turned us into little dissected ice cubes. But once that water melts, it all comes back together. And I really believe we're going to come back together. And I don't care where you came from, what your background was, what you studied, what your religion is, what your political belief is. As long as we can survive together, hey, that's all that's going to count.
Well, that's great. That's actually a great point. We had a member of our community here ask for a moment of contemplation and even prayer for a member that's in need. So in this sort of brief moment of silence, I think that we should reflect not just on what we can do for ourselves as the world changes, but what we can do for others. Because after all, this community is not a selfish community. It's one that revolves around our ability to help each other. And David, like you said, there will be a spiritual awakening of people's knowledge and understanding that we are all in this together. And if we're going to survive, we're going to need to survive together. So David, thank you so much for being here with us. Thank you so much for what you have brought to our table today. And for everyone watching, please go to David's YouTube channel at ADEPT2030. You can visit his website at oilseedcrops.org. If you have a question, if there's something that we went over today that you didn't understand, I am positive that he is willing to answer it for you and to bring you up to speed. And so David, thank you so much for being here tonight.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. And I will take those questions and run with them. And if I don't know the answer, I'll tell you right away I don't know the answer, because I don't know the answers to a lot of things. I don't know everything. I will definitely look into it and get back to you with the best answer of my ability to give you that. And also one last positive thing here. You know, I talk about organizing into groups in your own local neighborhood. There's going to be others doing the same thing. So you're not going to be alone as the only group trying to get it together as an area out there. There's going to be other groups doing the same thing. So if everybody organizes into community groups helping each other, the next community right next to you is going to be doing the same thing. Right. And then the next community down there is going to be doing the same thing. So there's going to be a help network outside your own network, as well as other communities that are organizing together. So don't feel you're ever going to be an island of, 20 or 50 people, and you'll never have any help, and you'll have to survive by yourself. And there's other groups of people that are going to be uniting and coming together as well. And these are other people to outreach. And then imagine 3 or 4 communities helping each other. There's going to be access at that point. Your cost of living is going to go way down. You won't have any cost of life. You produce almost everything yourself.
What a great mission.
Food, water, everything.
What a great mission statement that we understand and we are not alone. I don't think you could have said it any better. Thank you so much, David, for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much, too. I appreciate tonight. It was a great talk.
And thank you all the mods. Thank you everybody who watched. And again, if you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments below or email me at fullspectrumsurvival@gmail.com. Email David over at ADEPT2030. Thank you guys, and we wish you a good night. And as always, stay safe and keep watch.